Hey everybody, I'm Nick Layton.
And I'm Leah Bottima.
And we're the hosts of Were You Raised by Wolves?
Each week we try to make the world a kinder, nicer place.
Well, that's the idea, at least.
I mean, we try.
Have you ever wondered what to do if you're ghosted?
Or what to do when a friend asks you to borrow money?
Or the proper way to eat Cheetos?
You know, the big questions.
So please find Were You Raised by Wolves wherever you listen.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by the second annual Catskill Cuisine Festival. Visit catskill-cuisine.com to learn more and buy tickets.
Culture and Flavor is a podcast about food and culture centered in Black and Indigenous foodways. Hosted by myself, Zella Palmer, right here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Each episode features high vibrational conversations with cultural bearers, chefs, farmers, scholars, barbecue pitmasters, and more. Where there is flavor, there is history. Join me on Culture and Flavor and all of my guests as we share stories that will have you praise dancing, cooking, conjuring, and inspiring your culinary journey. Welcome to another episode of Culture and Flavor with your host, Zella Palmer. Today, we have Dr. Howard Conyers, the legendary Dr. Howard Conyers, NASA rocket scientist, barbecue historian, who has been a leader in Black foodways in the South for more than a decade. And we are so excited to have him on Culture and Flavor today. Welcome, Dr. Conyers, to Culture and Flavor.
Thanks for having me today, Zella. Really appreciate this opportunity. I'll take these opportunities lightly.
Thank you. And I want to start just by, just giving you your flowers, because you have, from the beginning of my career, been such a support and for our students, for chefs in the South, and really being a leader and a voice for all of us who are doing this work, particularly in the Southern region, that sometimes goes unnoticed. A lot of chefs or cultural bearers throughout, just kind of forget that there is a whole community here. And you were one of the first to really launch some of the most pivotal, groundbreaking work that I've seen in quite some time, and really bringing community together, which was profound. I mean, Black foodways is still, evolving, I think. And you were, you still are a NASA rocket scientist, doing your own work in science, and yet you still made time to honor your parents, your grandparents, those Black barbecue pitmasters that came before. And so I want to talk to you about your journey to barbecue, to becoming a NASA rocket scientist. I mean, you have done so much incredible work, and you are definitely Aggie Pride, North Carolina A&T.
All day.
All day. So talk to us.
I mean, I'm a product of the American South. I'm a product of the rural American South, in South Carolina in particular. A lot of people don't realize just how significant South Carolina is. And the South is to the foundation to America. And when you start talking about culture, the Black South is the home of it. And you can't really just separate South Carolina and the New Orleans area, but you have to really think about the whole South. And you don't get to see the roots of what the South produced, but oftentimes what get notoriety is the things that happen outside of the South, like in the North or the Midwest or the West Coast, where they're more city environment. But then when people want to search for a home or the origin story, it's in these little small isolated communities like where I'm from, in South Carolina in particular. I grew up in an area called Paxville, South Carolina, which was in Clarendon County. And a lot of these individuals in the South, after enslavement, people were still on the land farming, but they were sharecropping. Some people was farming their own land. Some people was farming other people's land. But they did things to survive and create agency for themselves. And I like this, since a lot of people know from barbecue, like barbecue is my life. Before I became an engineer, growing up, that's all I knew was barbecuing the whole hogs. But it went with a farming culture. Another culture and the barbecue is, and we probably don't ask more questions about it later, but like barbecue is foundational to the culture. That's when more people talk about it. And it was misunderstood for several years. And I think it's starting to get to a point where a lot more people know about barbecue and the role Black people had in it. But the one that's misunderstood right now, and there's a significant miseducation, is around moonshine and alcohol culture. Mm. A lot of people want to focus on what happened during enslavement, but people don't realize those traditions still lasted after enslavement, but they did it in environments where they could create their own self-sense of agency, and it was in the woods of the American South.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about moonshine because Dr. Conyers actually has a company that he launched with his father in Manning, South Carolina, his own moonshine, artisanal moonshine. And so we're going to come back and talk about that. But I want to talk about your journey, just growing up in Manning, and you deciding to go on to college. I mean, how did you become first of all, now the question our audience wants to know, how did you become a NASA rocket scientist?
The farm taught me all the science I need to know. A lot of Black people don't realize how much STEM education is in farming. You don't become a good farmer unless you understand it. The sciences as well as the engineering, or people say rigging, that's where you really learn the practical aspect of it. For Black people generally learn best that I have seen when they are actual doers of the work. Then when you go to school and understand the theory behind the work, it takes it to a whole nother level. And so education was very important in my community. And the reason it was very important in my community, I grew up in an area in Clarendon County where a lot of people talk about Brown versus Board of Education, but they fail to realize that it was 5 court cases. And one of the court cases, Briggs versus Elliott, was in my home county. And what people may know about that case, everybody may know about the baby doll experiment. And that was the experiment where they tested young kids to see what color doll they want to play with. I think the Clark, it was a couple out of New York, and basically Black kids wanted to play, they preferred to play with white dolls. And that is what made education so important in my community, and my family. We saw education as the greatest chance that you have to succeed, to not get out of poverty, but just for each generation to do better.
So what makes HBCU special to you, since you went to, North Carolina, you met your wife there, you go back every year. I mean, anyone who graduated from North Carolina A&T, y'all have so much pride. I mean, it's as big as like, I think Howard or Morehouse or something like that.
It's probably bigger, but HBCUs are special because of the family and the community you get sense of it. The amount of excellence on campus. I also understand that at one point you couldn't go to other universities. People couldn't go to other universities, but HBCUs is a special thing, a special place. I hope they remain. And one of the reasons when I first met you and I saw the work you were doing here at Dillard, it was so important to see, like, even though Dillard is not my alma mater, I thought it was important to see this program succeed and see a side of culture outside of Louisiana. And I think that was my impetus for giving back to this program, because I'm for all HBCUs, don't matter which ones they are, where they're located. My mom was an HBCU grad, a small college called Voorhees, and it's probably about the size of Dillard. Now that I think about it, my brothers, a lot of my family members who did go to college, they started out at HBCUs.
So on the farm, I mean, and you have such lovely parents. I've met them many times, and I feel like a distant relative. And they've just been so lovely to me, my students, everyone. Talk about just those memories, those whole hog barbecue memories, and what makes South Carolina and the area that you're in so special with whole hog barbecue, because it's, for those of us who are listening, they might not know about the Carolinas and how, deep barbecue runs.
I think what is deep is like when you see people preserve a culture and there's no money being exchanged, and they just preserving it for just the sheer love of what it means and what it brings back to your family and your community, your friends. When you think about I would say the eastern half of the Carolinas, because the eastern half of the Carolinas was an agricultural belt. I don't really know about the western half of either Carolinas, the upstate of South Carolina like that, because it's just something different when you have, and what I mean by agricultural area in the eastern half of the state, that where all the majority of the slave plantations were from. Like in South Carolina, from like Columbia down, there's a different set of culture than the upstate, the geography. And so like when you have, where I grew up, the area was known for more tobacco and cotton. Cotton was king. Where my mom was from, tobacco was king. Then when you get into like North Carolina, tobacco was king because you had those different tobacco companies that coming out of Winston-Salem who was the processors. And so whole hog was significant in that region. And I think people just fail to realize how significant it is, and it get often overlooked in the conversation. And the people who really get overlooked, the whole hog barbecue conversation is starting to come up, but the people who was doing the hard work behind whole hog barbecue are what get overlooked.
You were instrumental in the Kingsford campaign to uplift Black pitmasters, unrecognized Black pitmasters. I want you to talk about some of those unrecognized Black pitmasters and why you partnered with Kingsford Barbecue and why you started the Black Barbecue Hall of Fame.
So some of those unknown Black pitmasters, you had like Ed Mitchells of the world, Grady, Mr. Stephen and Jerry Grady, Miss Helen Turner. You see those individuals often go overlooked in the major conversations. And then the other part of it, when you look at some of those individuals, you didn't see who they could pass their legacy down to. They had thriving barbecue businesses and nobody to come in the lines down the road to pick it up and take it to the next level in life. The Mitchells are doing something with Ryan, but a lot of them I've seen across the board who was doing it. They once the generation of like I'll say Mr. Grady, for example, don't see who's going to take it up. And I did that when I traveled across the South, and I saw a lot of these legacy spots didn't have somebody who passed it on to. And so that's kind of why when I thought about like the program I worked with Kingsford in developing called Preserve the Pit, it was significant because it hopefully helped create generational businesses and wealth in the community. And that is what's going to really help the Black community more. It's not just about like building wealth, but you need the wealth, the economics to build and sustain a community as well. The reason I decided to work with Kingsford, growing up, when we wasn't cooking barbecue and we were grilling, Kingsford charcoal was always being used.
At every barbecue.
Every barbecue, it was a blue and white bag. So for me, I wanted to do something with a company. When I do partnerships with people, I like to do partnerships with people who I have a connection with, the product I've used and I stand behind. Like I wouldn't want to do. Sometimes people do partnerships with companies and things that they don't really agree with, or they do it just for the money. But like Kingsford just was a natural fit because we've been using it for 35 years. And even there was a stint in my life where we used the charcoal to cook whole hog when we had a hurricane because the woods were so severely damaged that we wanted to give the wood some time to heal. And so we said, we'll use the charcoal briquettes to cook barbecue instead of using oak wood.
It doesn't matter the wood. I know we have some barbecue enthusiasts out there, and they'll probably ask, what wood should I use? And let me just say, y'all, over the past decade, I have watched Dr. Conyers cook a whole hog, get into the research. He designed a pit that, rotated a whole hog.
That was a cow.
It was a cow.
That was a cow.
No, I'm sorry, not a cow, a hog, a cow. It was a whole cow. It was the most succulent piece of meat that I've ever tasted. It was amazing. BJ Dennis was there. I mean, there were so many chefs that came down for that. And DJ Jubilee here in New Orleans was the DJ. The Indians came out, the Mardi Gras Indians. I mean, it was a phenomenal event. And I want you to talk about some of your research because I greatly benefited from being able to have conversations with you and to talk about the politics behind barbecue and going way back into the role of Black pitmasters during slavery and after slavery and finding these unsung heroes that we included in Ed Mitchell's barbecue book because we wanted to lift up their names and show the visuals of this robust history that is in Eastern North Carolina and whole hog, culture in Eastern North Carolina. So I would love for you just to talk about some of your research because you have, you you always push back on certain research that comes out that that leaves us out of the narrative. And I would love for you to talk about that. I know you love Joseph Haynes. There's some other, scholars out there.
There's two guys that I've seen, and people may say like, Black folks always need to tell their story, but sometimes white folks do just an amazing job telling our stories, doing the research and doing it well. And Joseph Haynes out of Virginia and a guy named Dr. Andrew Warner out of the UK, they really done some exceptional work in the history of barbecue. I think what was missing that they could never get, though, was a lot of Black culture is passed down orally. But what they could find in the archives through their sources, they talked about, and they were very few individuals who uplifted Black people in the barbecue canon. But I think just overall, like, people feel real like barbecue is political. Mm-hmm. And barbecue is political because barbecue first started at political rallies to get votes. And this was in like the 1600s, 1700s. You had to get people together to get votes. The plantation elite had to get people to, and so to feed people during that time, people felt aroused. We don't have refrigeration. We got to feed the masses. Barbecue was the only thing that could feed 1,000 to 10,000 people at a time. And you got endless workforce. Not saying it's right. Slavery is real. So you have 50 slaves. You could cook to feed 10,000 people for a barbecue because you didn't need, and that's the only dish. And that's the reason why it sustained itself over time, because the magnitude of the people and the things you could influence in many from 50 people to 10,000 people using barbecue. But the people who was doing the work, you never hear them talking about the stories. And whether it's George Washington had them on his plantation, Thomas Jefferson, they'll talk about the event, but they don't talk about the people doing the work.
Mm-hmm. Even down to President Jimmy Carter. I mean, he was, there's footage out there. There's,
Jimmy Carter. Yeah, you going to Texas. He brought the South
to the White House. I mean, he had all kind of people at
Jimmy Carter from Georgia.
Yeah, he's from Georgia.
I mean, he was true to who he was. Even Texas had.
He was, God rest.
I mean, he was still true to the South. I mean, that was something he loved. He may not talk about everything, but then you think about Texas. Mm-hmm. Texas had the same, and the reason I talk about like the South, Texas had the same style of pit cook barbecue in the Eastern region, but nobody want to talk about that Eastern region of Texas.
Why not?
Because the barbecue, Black people was there cooking the barbecue, and the pits looked like the same pits you would find in the Carolinas. And the only way that knowledge was passed during that time is with slavery, because you had to pass the knowledge to the heads and the people doing the work.
So going back to the whole cow, how did you find out about, the link between Black pit masters, or as during slavery, they were also called pit boys. I had many terminologies. How did you find out about cooking a whole cow, and what was the process of you designing this and engineering this pit?
When you look into historical literature, they all talk about, whether it's Joseph Haynes or Robert Moss or whoever these barbecue scholars out here, they talk about people cooking cows, or they'll say hogs, lamb, sheep. And then when they talk about cows, they'll talk about ox roast, in which ox roast is different from barbecue, but they talk about we cooking a half a cow or ox. And they're like, that's the one thing. Growing up, all I seen was cows, maybe occasionally a goat. But I never seen anybody talk about cooking a whole cow. And but in Joseph Haynes' book, he gave some insight, some clues. They wasn't 100% there about how they would potentially design for some of the larger cows apparatuses to actually help cook the cow. But what I didn't know was the methodology and the understanding, because to cook that much meat at one time, you got a lot of gaps. And so cooking a cow for me was not just, it was a journey, a process. Like I grew up cooking barbecue on an old refrigerator, old converted refrigerator, International Harvester to be exact. And then some people, my uncles would cook on like blocks or like roofing tin pits, but they were basically all square box, no thermometers. And so, but they all had the same origin. They had the origin in the ground. And so my father learned how to cook in the ground. So I had to, for myself, I had to convince myself of the process. So I start back cooking in the ground. And I did that the first time I did it in Shreveport, Louisiana. And over time, I started developing confidence, but also felt like I was gaining that ancestral knowledge you need to complete that task. And the cow was a combination of, I wanted to look at the culture, but also wanted to look at the engineering behind when it made the pit that rotated. Now that was the engineering and the trades are something that's very important. And I think the cow symbolized everything in my family, my community, and Black people with making a pit, using the resources they have to cook and execute the whole cow. Yeah, the barbecue art, that was one thing, but to actually go through and design and build a pit and then execute it without cooking on it before, then that's when it all comes together. Because people are like, oh, you don't do a practice run? I'm like, nah, I can't do a practice run. Cows cost too much.
Let's talk about agriculture. We Black farmers have had stolen land. I mean, all kinds of things that they're dealing with. And we are at a very dangerous time where Black farmers, the percentage is very small, and I want you to talk about just the power of the land, the power of agriculture, because you've returned to your family's land and farm. You live between New Orleans and South Carolina. And I would love for you to talk about just how much power owning land is in Black communities and what that does.
I mean, owning land and being able to produce from the land makes you self-sufficient. That's powerful. If we don't understand what that means exactly, it should have became clear during COVID when you can't do a simple act of feeding yourselves. And being in the city, I'm like, wow, I can't really feed myself. Well, I was in South Carolina, I could go fish, I could go hunt, I could grow things in the garden. You always be able to eat. And at that point, money could be immaterial. But if you don't have that thing to feed yourself or provide food, water, and shelter, those three basic things, you're a powerless people. Food, water, and shelter. I'm not saying that you don't need the technology, but to sustain human life, that's what you need.
And you invited a lot of us, which we greatly appreciate from the community, to come to your inaugural
Gumbo Jubilee.
Not just Gumbo Jubilee, but Black Bar. But we can talk about Gumbo Jubilee. Let's talk about Gumbo Jubilee first.
So Gumbo Jubilee, I thought that was significant because, during that time period, I was doing work with PBS and documenting Black cultural foodways in the South. But I thought people really need to hear from Miss Leah Chase. I did an interview with her, but that didn't really touch the interview was amazing. What was shared was great, but the things that she could tell us, nobody else could tell us. And I thought that if we wanted to grow into this community, we need to hear from. She was one of that era. From her era, she was probably one of the last ones. I can't think it was any more. No, not Miss Helen, but Joe Randall was live. Yeah, she was pretty one of the last few of that particular generation. So I thought it was important for a gathering of chefs to come, writers, different people who want to talk about Black food and culture. And they came to Dillard University and had workshops. But I thought that was significant for that point. But also and I think those people's lives forever change. I think a lot of those individuals stay connected. Did I stay connected with all those individuals? Honestly, I say no. But to see them being a pivotal point, because obviously they went and communicated with each other. So, and there were some other events in the Black cultural world. But what I would say is I didn't have no funders or agendas behind me. All I had behind me, I was just being honest, I wanted to give something authentic and real.
And you did and let me just say, you did an incredible job of that. And I think you don't get enough credit for being one of the pioneers and even just media and the internet. When we talk about when you had the show Nourish on PBS, millions of people watched that show. And I would love for you to talk about media, and your observations of what needs to be done for those going forward, because there's a lot of interest in Black stories, particularly Black food stories now, as we see, High on the Hog on Netflix. There's some other shows, that are out there. But for me, your show was one of my favorite shows, and I know that other people looked forward to seeing that show and seeing you because of just the authenticity that you put in that show and just your connection to community and being able to have just organic conversations.
So one of the big things I see in media, the authentic voices from the South don't get to always tell their own story. Mm-hmm. And then you have outsiders get to try to tell a story that they don't really even truly know. And it doesn't matter. I don't care how many academic degrees you have behind your name. That doesn't necessarily make you a scholar it makes you a scholar on paper, but that doesn't make you a scholar of the culture. Mm. And I know, I have a PhD, but it's engineering. I don't have a PhD in culture. Mm. And I think sometimes I only get in certain rooms because I have a PhD. They don't look at what the PhD is in, mm-hmm. but they say, oh, you Dr. Conyers, so you could come into this room. But then when your culture is so real and I don't brag, like growing up where I grew up at, I think it was just a perfect combination for me where I'm at in life. And now one time I thought I grew up in a small town. I ain't anything special about it. But now as I grow older, I'm like, it's a lot of special things that I got to experience and witness that a lot of people never had the opportunity. Media, I hope Black food media continues to go forward in telling those stories and letting those content creators from those areas tell that story and benefit from it instead of just all outsiders. And the outsiders are not just white folks. The outsider are Black folk. Advocate. I think sometimes it costs me opportunities I know where I advocate for writers or photographers to tell a story, especially if it's involving me. If you want my story, I feel like they want the right person to tell the story but the right person also has to be qualified or given the opportunity to be proven themselves to be qualified. Digital media is the future. Mm-hmm. It was the future at the time. Mm-hmm. I was on the front end of it, I believe, maybe the second. There wasn't too many digital shows. People's attention spans, I think that format was a really good one for the time frame with keeping people interest. I hope it did open up other opportunities, but then we also have to own what we create too. Mm-hmm. Because if we give it all out and don't own it, then we're not going to be able to benefit down the road from it.
And so did that lead you to decide, because the Barbecue Hall of Fame has been around for quite some time, and did that lead you to say, not only am I going to do Gumbo Jubilee, which you did very well. People came from all over for that. And you did Roots of Barbecue. Then you did the Black Barbecue Hall of Fame in what year? What year was that? I can't remember. I was there and I was...
The first 2021?
Yeah.
2022.
2022 on your family's land.
Yeah.
And, I just saw so many of the elders just be emotional about receiving an award for being recognized and just the camaraderie, and Mr. Ed Mitchell was just over the top happy just to be there. I just remember sitting next to him and he said, "Baby girl, this is one of my favorite awards." I'm just shook.
So I got big plans for that. And one of the reasons I did it, so I look at the Barbecue Hall of Fame and I never saw Black people being put into the Barbecue Hall of Fame while they were alive. And even some of the people who got into the Barbecue Hall of Fame Black later, I submitted their names years prior. Mm. And I knew they was Barbecue Hall of Fame worthy, but it just didn't get in. I'm like, but the thing that I felt good about it, nobody can't say that I didn't recommend it them because I have a paper trail. Mm-hmm. But then I also see to keep it going is going to be important because I also want to bring attention to the work and the present of barbecue as well. I want to go, I did the past and I'm going to look at the regions. I want to look at the regions. But those individuals need that recognition and they need some place where, and it's been crazy how even the Barbecue Hall of Fame nationally had created a category called the unknown I think with the unknown pitmasters or the unknown black pitmasters, it was really like they almost like they're watching what I'm doing, but not want to say they're paying attention to what I'm doing. So, but people know like you would have well, at that time, they really just like focus, centralize on, people talk about black pitmasters here and there, but not like focus, intentional. I had an intentional.
You were the only one. Let's just keep it 1,000. I'm going to tell you, you were the only one. You were the only one lifting up. I mean, yes, there were scholars. There's scholars out there that are doing incredible work in the research and, telling those stories that need to be told. I mean, we had, when I remember the research process of Ed Mitchell's, cookbook, it was finding, some of those pitmasters from, the 1920s who were shipping out whole hog barbecue to, Hollywood stars and, and cooking, hundreds of whole hogs. Right. So for me, looking on the outside in, you were the only one that was doing that and documenting that, which is the most critical and important part about it is the archival piece of it. Because I look at like Rudy Lombard's book, Creole Feast from the 1970s, right? If we didn't have his book, we wouldn't have a clue on who was actually in the back of the house creating some of the most finest dishes in some of the best restaurants in New Orleans, So I'm giving you your flowers. I know you're humble, but I'm going to give you your flowers.
I appreciate it. No, I just know like it was important and to keep it going. Eventually one day we may not have to say black pitmasters, but for that time period, I want to make sure those people are documented with their pictures, videos, associated videos to come with those individuals, their areas where they're from, because they may be in some small town that, like I went into a place in Farmville, North Carolina before they closed, and we would never know what the inside of that guy's pit looked like if I didn't have pictures and video even. And you don't have to have the perfect camera, you don't have to have the perfect phone, but you have to have something. Mm-hmm. And and one of the things growing up, we didn't take pictures cooking whole hog. We took it for granted. And so like as a child, I was very eclectic. I used to collect antiques. Mm-hmm. And those antiques, really, they tell the story of our people. And so they like in South Carolina now, they have this guy named Cecil Williams, Mr. Cecil Williams. He took photographs of like the civil rights movement in South Carolina for like the Orangeburg Massacre and stuff. What if he didn't take those pictures? Or if you're in New Orleans, you got people like Eric Waters and some other photographers. If they didn't take pictures of the culture 40 years ago, what would we have? Mm-hmm. So, but the artifacts are important. And one day I probably will open a museum because I think I got some pieces that very few individuals have. I mean, I know I got one piece, two pieces I know should probably be in a museum. I got this pestle, and this pestle immortal is a rice pestle immortal. But they got engravings like from West Africa engravings on it.
Wow.
And when I went to this museum in Phoenix, they talk about how the pestle immortal was sometimes doubly used, not only to grind grain or rice, but it was also used as a drum in rituals. And so I think this one could have possibly did both.
That's powerful. I would love to see that.
I think you saw it. I brought it out. I brought it out.
You sure did. I remember now. Yeah, I remember. But y'all, we will be back after a few messages from our advertisers. It's such a pleasure having this conversation with Dr. Howard Conyers. I hope y'all come back after a few messages from our advertisers.
Gather your friends and family at the second annual Catskill Cuisine Festival, presented by the Sullivan Catskills Visitors Association, Bethel Woods Center for the Arts, and Resorts World Catskills. Mark your calendars for a flavor-packed weekend from May 10th to May 12th. Experience the fusion of phenomenal food and electrifying entertainment. Rub shoulders with your favorite Food Network personalities, including Andrew Zimmern, Michael Simon, Scott Conant, Marcus Samuelson, Jeffrey Zakarian, Anne Burrell, Melba Wilson, and distinguished international chefs by LaBelle Farms. Kick off the festivities with Friday's star-studded golf tournament and evening reception. Saturday heats up with free tastings, thrilling live demos, music, and family activities, culminating with a gourmet dinner hosted by celebrity chefs. And on Sunday, celebrate Mother's Day with a special celebrity-curated brunch. Tickets for this celebration are selling like hotcakes. Visit catskill-cuisine.com to grab your pass for this unforgettable weekend in the picturesque Catskills. See you there.
We're back with Dr. Howard Conyers, and we're going to really get into moonshining, his appearance on Cedric the Entertainer, and Anthony Anderson's show, King Barbecue, and just where he is now and what are his thoughts about foodways and, celebrity chef culture. But we're going to talk about those things. So let's start with, how was it on the show with Cedric the Entertainer and Anthony Anderson? I mean, they're hilarious. Let's just put that out there.
They're hilarious. When I decided to do that show, initially I didn't want to be on that show, but a lot of people in the the community thought like, they posted it like, you should be on this show. They need to find you. But I said, no, you know what? I'm gonna reach out because so many people start DMing me about and I told the producers, I really don't want to be on the show, but I want to make sure you all tell the story of Black barbecue right, because you all have the opportunity and platform with there's something different about being a celebrity. Mm-hmm. And they have the platform to put a message out that could go further than anything I ever say. Mm-hmm. Also, with them being comedians, they could also say some things that may be difficult to hear. Mm. And they could they used to get by with things, but they still could comedians still sort of have a safe space in a way. They kind of have a safe space. Yeah. So I thought it was just a good thing to do for the culture with putting it out on a bigger stage. And everybody said it was a great episode. And I got to honor two people who was doing great barbecue in Payne's Barbecue in Memphis. And they were cooking, they the oldest Black barbecue in Memphis, Tennessee. I think they was 50-something years old. And then Miss Helen Turner in Brownsville, Tennessee. You're
making me hungry. See, I'm thinking about barbecue right now. I miss that whole hog barbecue and just barbecue in general. I love New Orleans food, but we don't have good barbecue like they do in the Carolinas and other parts. I'm sorry to tell y'all that.
I just appreciate it for what it is. So I just thought it was a great opportunity. That was probably the biggest opportunity I have. And before is making sure the messaging got out besides having my own show. So it was great. I mean, I don't take anything for granted. I mean, will I do it again? Mm-hmm. Maybe not. Celebrity culture has its downsides, especially celebrity chef culture. I don't even know if I even want to talk about it, Zella. It's scary.
Yeah, I want you to talk about it because, for those who are coming up as chefs or who want to, get into barbecue, how do you honor the past and, build legacy?
I don't know if celebrity culture honors the past. And when people I see are celebrities, chefs, and influencers, they don't do the research. And also, you could be the person that spread misinformation because you're too lazy to tell the right or to do the right work to tell the right information, because that might belittle your platform. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if those two things go together.
But within the rise of more interest in Black food stories, how should the media or, those who have the possibility to give opportunities, what should they be thinking, in 5-10 years? And what should, those writers and the chefs be thinking, because it's still kind of, in some ways, very new. I mean, there's a lot of Black cookbooks that are out now. There's a lot of Black food stories that are out. Finally, centuries later, a collective of Black pitmasters got some recognition. So where should we be headed? Because I think you are a good, observer of the culture and just have a grasp on where we need to go.
We have to make sure we got to have good business sense to the culture. But what I will say is we have to take pride in the ingredients that produces the food. Mm-hmm. I see Black culture oftentimes don't take pride in the ingredients that really defines the food. in the food ways or the beverage ways.
Is that because of cost effectiveness, or is that because of the lack of relationships with Black farmers, or just farmers in general?
I don't even think it's that. I think it's somewhat the loss of the tongue. We done lost what good food tastes like.
Ooh.
We don't know what good food tastes like anymore because we done had so much processed food for so long that we forgot.
And do you think we're so focused on the presentation and not the flavor, the like you said, the ingredients?
We done had processed food so long that we had to learn how to cover it up and mask what real food is.
Yeah.
Yes, will things grown or raised or caught cost more? Yes. Would you need as much? No. And so we just really lost the tongue. I think we lost the tongue. And we also lost how to work with the ingredients because we done got so much in a microwave society.
I'll never forget being in Miss Aretha Mitchell, Ed Mitchell's mother's, she's in her 90s now, and in her kitchen. That was, it took me back to, the ladies growing up on the south side of Chicago, the church ladies who were from Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, who would cook and sell plates from their home or from the churches. And I haven't had a meal like that in a long time. And that was some of the best food I've ever had. And, and I just remember her saying, baby, I don't eat everything, And she said sugar was a luxury. Flour was a luxury.
Yeah, flour was a luxury.
We didn't go to the supermarkets. We grew our own food. Her rutabagas, her fried fish freshly caught. It was her potato jacks just off the chain.
And so when I see people like BJ Dennis or Gabrielle Centenine, like using stuff as real locally produced product, like BJ Dennis really understand the ingredient.
Yeah.
He understand how it's prepared.
Yeah.
He done did a lot of work. But individuals like him don't always they're not the most, they don't get the flowers or the recognition they do deserve all the time. Like he's
one of the best chefs I've ever, and I don't say that lightly.
He is probably one of the best chefs. He was one of the best chefs I know. He also one of the best chefs that I know who could cook open fire cooking.
Absolutely.
And like true open fire cooking in cast iron pots. I wouldn't put anything against him. I wouldn't put anybody against him. He's in his own category. And what I do, this is what I hate though. I hate when people come down south, see things and take it back up north and think they invented it and don't give credit to the people who they see it from. So like people say, why you don't call all the time anymore? Because I've seen so much. I'm like, y'all take stuff and y'all go up north to make money from it, but don't send resources back. I believe if you get the opportunity, you take pieces of culture elements back, you need to send something back. Not necessarily to me, but maybe to that farmer you saw down south who may not have good health care, might need medicine this week. I don't know. But you just came down here, spent a few hours with him, and he or she.
I do believe what you're talking about, similar to some of the things you're saying, how we've lost the memory, the food, the cultural and food memory that our, aunties, uncles, grandparents had. It's also the sense of community. Because when I do the research about my great grandfather, I remember my grandmother and my mother telling me how when he was a doctor, people would put fruits and vegetables, farmers would, because they couldn't afford health care. There was no such thing as, insurance back then, and people didn't have money like that. So they paid, in trade and paid in kindness, and they would wake up in the morning and the whole porch would be full of fruits and vegetables and fish.
And that's how it worked. I mean, I heard a guy say recently, like, we need to go back to barter, and this was a white guy.
That's right, we do.
What happens if we go back to barter? How many black people gonna have something to barter with?
You got a point.
You got to have something to barter with. You can't just barter with nothing.
No, you can't.
And that's the reason land is so powerful.
Land is powerful, and that brings me to barbecue and moonshine. Barbecue and moonshine. Your moonshine is very smooth. I've had it many times at your functions, and when you come in town, I'm always like, give me some of that moonshine. Talk to us about why you decided to, go back to making moonshine and, the lessons that you learned from your father and the men in your community about moonshine and those who came before?
When you think about, people don't understand, moonshine is just more than just a spirit. It's a community builder. It's a community stabilizer. And what I mean by a stabilizer, it's an ecosystem. It also is an uplifter of the community, not just of joy. So many people and families directly and indirectly benefited in the North and the South from people who made moonshine in the South.
How?
People wasn't just drinking all the alcohol made in the South. The alcohol was following the Great Migration Paths. And where you had, maybe in the city, you talk about speakeasies in the city. In the rural area, you talk about juke joints and liquor houses, nip houses. In those nip houses, you had music, or liquor houses or juke joints, you had music. But you also had a food component.
Right.
So you create, the money is circulating inside a community. And that's the reason I say it stabilized the community. But when the alcohol left the South and went into these cities, it also was an uplift because, I'm going to take that back. It was also part of stabilization because it was a family member probably up north, out west. The reason I say it was an uplifting point because a lot of families got educated because of liquor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A lot of people survived, but a lot of people put kids through college. Mm-hmm. And we don't hear about that story. When we hear about stories, we heard about this interesting story with this lady in Detroit who aunt was like a numbers runner, right? Mm-hmm. What if her mama didn't run numbers? Mm. And numbers was the modern day lottery system. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But the bootleg culture was the same thing. I mean, the moonshine bootleg culture was the same thing. And they go hand in hand with barbecue. They were really first cousins. Some people, you could say brothers and sisters, or you could say they're first cousins. Mm-hmm. But the bootlegging culture also has a lot of political implications. You have to start thinking about how laws was written. Like one time, post-slavery, how they distribute alcohol. Some people, you have to have a medical prescription to get rid of alcohol. Or then you start saying, oh, some counties are dry and some counties are wet. Why are some counties dry and some counties wet? You want every county to be dry. Because if you dry, you don't have to send the taxes in. If you're wet, you may have to send the taxes to the state revenue officer. And they distribute. Mm-hmm. But if it's dry, you can keep the money in the community. But people fail to realize how much work, hard work, is into making alcohol and liquor.
Talk about the process of making moonshine, because, I mean, it's a whole, I remember just researching Ed Mitchell, loves to talk about moonshine and barbecue, and he would talk about, how it went hand in hand, and even, we talked about the state, revenue and the taxes, and the tax man would come and try to find moonshiners and arrest them, black or white, and, there was always, it was seen as, and it was even commercialized and advertised as, the devil's drink, or, all this thing. And it's always interesting just how
religion. You got to put that into it. It makes it. But sometimes some of the religious people had the stills. I mean,
you better talk about it.
I mean, the most popular one that everybody know about is Jack Daniels. When the original founder, before he sold it to Jack Daniels, he was a Baptist preacher.
That's right. Mm.
So you talk about Fannie Lou Hamer. Her father was a bootlegger. He didn't make the alcohol, but he sold it. Mm. I mean, so it was like some people needed to survive, but some people use it to get ahead. And so the laws, the politicians, the preachers, they were all in cahoots. The best, most respected individuals in the community were oftentimes the bootleggers. Because they already knew they knew the lawyers, they knew the policeman, the sheriff, because they were paying gratuities, paying tips to those guys to keep them from being caught by the revenue officer. Or depending how the state laws, like some black people work for themselves, but some black people work under somebody white. Because when you're going in the woods,
that happened often. Yeah.
Yeah, it happened often. Or
both ways. Everybody, I think it was a sophisticated network, and it's in many ways, because the one who was making the most money had the lawyers on speed dial to get there, because if that bootlegger, if that moonshine maker was making good moonshine, he's going to get you out of jail.
He don't get you out of jail. You're not going to go in jail to start with.
Right.
That part, if you're a good moonshine maker, you're not going to go in jail to start with.
You're right.
Because well-made moonshine is very artisanal. It's almost like mezcal. But in my mind, it's the forgotten spirit of the American South.
Okay.
From enslavement forward, people don't really know because sometimes moonshine, people are like, oh, it tastes like this, but what it is made in makes a big difference. If you don't have good resources and you buying a piece of copper and you got antifreeze, old copper part out of old car, what you think alcohol going to taste like? But why it's going to kill somebody? Or you don't understand the science behind it. And there's so much science behind the alcohol, and but the real thing, it's a lot of hard work, because you had to do this out of the sight of everybody.
Yeah.
And so you might walk a mile or half a mile to where your still is located at.
Those stumpo liquor. That's what they used to call it.
They call it, well, they didn't really call it moonshine. That is what people call it loosely now. But they would call it stumpo, stump, corn. Some people call it creek water. Some people call it fire water. But the reason, like Ed Mitchell said in his book, and he said it went hand in hand. And one of the lines I thought about, he had in his book, those who cook barbecue were also the best moonshiners. That rang true even in my own community. And when I listen to like people from my father's generation talk, most of the best ones, well, not the best ones, most of the ones who cook barbecue, they also made liquor. But in my own life, every time we barbecued hogs as a child, moonshine showed up. It was and this is not anything to religion, nothing. It will always show up. Probably, I can remember it always showing up 3 or 4 days before a hog was being cooked. It was more so for like everybody coming around for fellowship. They have something to drink. I couldn't drink, of course, but you just always saw that product there.
I want to talk about hog killings and, just the pushback that we've had, over different times in history about don't eat pork, don't eat swine. I want to talk about just how important hog killings were, what it means to raise your own livestock.
So I think some of these things are rituals, but they also classrooms. People fail to realize they was classrooms on life. And what I mean by that, and I'm not being sexist in this day and age, but there were certain activities where the males were, where the boys were. The boys was outside with the males when they were doing these hog killings, and then out to another part of the farm on the inside with the women working on the other parts of the processing side. So it was a division. And so in those moments during the killing and activities, there was conversations that could be had that they couldn't be had anyplace else. It was a safe space, but it also was a mentoring space. And we don't have those spaces, for one. So I would say it was a ritual for like the hog killing and stuff like that. There's a sense of community building. What I would say about the actual raising your own, you know exactly what's in it. And I think there's a shift. If you notice, people who have more resources, they spend more on their food. But those same people probably spending less on medication. Because when you're growing animals in tight confinement, you're also putting hormones and antibiotics in those animals to help them grow. And so from a point of science, if you feed a pig or cow some kind of antibiotic, it just don't go away. It transfers. And if you take microbiology, the resistance builds up. So you got to take more drugs. The end consumer got to take drugs. But the human being. So people don't, it's a correlation, but a lot of people don't understand the science. I mean, I'm lucky that I went to school and understand some of the sciences, like the biological side of the sciences. But like the microbiologies and the organic chemistries, those drugs just don't go away.
So is barbecue, that saying that, it's as American as apple pie.
It's more American than apple pie.
Explain to our listeners why.
Apple pie is a derivative. I mean, barbecue was there at the very beginning before the country was formed. Apple pie is seasonal. Apple pie, you couldn't eat apple pie all year round unless they can and preserve it. Barbecue could eat year round. As long as you had animals growing on a plantation, you had a workforce, you could produce it. And so I always hear people say, like, apple pie is the American dish. Barbecue is the American. I believe barbecue is the American dish.
What about moonshine?
Moonshine is not the American drink, because bourbon already claimed that. But I think it's a drink that defines a 130-year period from emancipation forward for Black people. Where if we say, and this is what I'm saying, if they say we're not involved in the distilling traditions of their country, if you go back and look at 130-year history and in this country post-enslavement, moonshine was where Black people practiced their traditions of distilling alcohol. When you go back in this enslavement, you have to think about people were making rum, people were making mead. In some moonshines, sugar is in the moonshine mash recipe, right? And if you think about sugar is not what rum, or sugar is molasses. Sugar comes from cane, from sugar cane, the plant. When you make rum is made from sugar cane juice, but sugar is a more processed form of cane juice. But you still have a sugar source. Whereas when you're making alcohol from a grain, and this is a science, I'm probably a nerd in some ways, but when you're making corn from a grain, you got to convert it from a carbohydrate and use enzymes to make it a sugar. And so it's not a direct conversion, it's almost a two-step conversion. Where if you're making it from a cane-based product or sugar beets or something like that, it's only a one step. So the more processes you use to convert alcohol, you actually can create more byproducts during the conversion process, because nothing is 100% efficient.
Y'all hear that? Come on, Dr. Conyers.
Nothing is 100%. So the more processes you have in anything, the more opportunities for new things to come into the equation.
And that leads me to one last question. Everybody, the world knows more about Texas barbecue, I think. Texas style barbecue. What makes the Carolinas so special? And is it because Texas barbecue is better? And no shade to anybody who's from Texas, but I think when I look at just barbecue from all over the U.S., there's so many different styles of barbecue, but the root of it is, large part Carolinas and from the Carolinas. And what makes the Carolinas so special? Is it the whole hog barbecue? Is it, the different sauces? Because there's different sauces.
I'm going to take it a little different angle. I think what is significant about the Carolinas is they preserved it. Why they preserved it for so long and so continuously is significant. Texas barbecue, and you can't forget about Virginia in the equation, but like Texas barbecue in the recent years with this explosion of what Texas barbecue, I believe that is a major way washing Black people out of the barbecue equation. And what I'm going to give credit to Texas for, Texas had a media machine. Also, I'm going to give credit to this writer, Daniel Vaughn. I asked him this question, and he said they had the perfect storm. And anybody know anything about a perfect storm like New Orleans and Katrina? When Austin, Texas has brisket, a music festival called South by Southwest, That's something significant. If you don't understand what South by Southwest is, where it's like the integration of technology, and you have all kind of people from around the world coming to Austin, Texas for this festival, where it's an integration of technology and immersion, but also during the same time period, people were coming there with phones, and you got social media. Imagine what that perfect storm and how fast a message can be passed. And so that right there, all those things coming together really shot Texas barbecue to the top.
It did. I really did.
I mean, you can't really deny the facts.
No, you can't.
That's a big event. South by Southwest is a huge event.
But, you know, and
I mean, that between that and the phone, you can't.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm just looking at even just, you know, what Brazil is doing now in barbecue. And when I think about, you know, your pit that you engineered, and I was there, you know, last summer for Churrascada, and I'm just seeing like floating pits, and I'm just like, wow, you know, and it just made me think of, you know, you and what you've contributed, and that moment of, you know, just everyone pulling out their phone at Gumbo Jubilee to see what you designed. It was incredible, you know.
Yeah, and you also got to think about from when you saw those different pits in Brazil. Yeah, they didn't have the technology to manufacture those type pits. Yeah. And so until probably the last about 1940s and 1950s, you couldn't work with metals like you do today.
Yeah. True.
I mean, yeah, you had the Industrial Revolution, but they weren't working with metals. Like you could take water and cut an intricate design in a sheet of steel.
But it's and you know, here's the thing: it's not even. It you know, it's great to design these, you know, masterpieces and, you know, pits and things like that. But I always go back to what Mr. Mitchell talked about, how he would pull up with his brothers, and you know, they had this, you know, old school pit. It's about the skills. It's about the technique. It's about the generations of flavor and skill taken down, you know, passed down from generation to generation. Because as you said, you know, you grew up cooking, you know, hogs in a refrigerator, you know. It has nothing to do with, you know,
the technique. It's the technique. And that some of those techniques produce a flavor that modern technology can't replicate yet. No. I even thought about like, how could I like use different measuring devices to replicate my own cooking process? It could eventually get to the point where it replicate and come out with the same flavor, but it won't have the same soul. And it's kind of like cooking pizza. You go to a fast food pizza joint, or you go to one of cooking wood fire pizzas.
Right.
The taste, it's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing with barbecue.
Well, Dr. Conyers, it's been such a pleasure to have you on Culture and Flavor. You know, we want to continue to support your work, support your Moonshine company. Can you give us a little bit more information about where we can follow you or to hear more about some of the projects that you're working on? Because you are doing incredible work in the community and even just being an example for our youth as a rocket scientist.
Instagram, Howard Conyers _PhD, website howardconyers.com, distillery, Backyard Distillery, LLC, and SIG.com, and Conyers Family Barbecue. Those are kind of 3 places you can find me.
And just so our listeners know, it's, you know, it's artisanal moonshine, and he doesn't, you know, really pull it out to the public that often. Is something that he is doing as a project, if I'm not mistaken. Or you want to talk about that a little bit?
It's a business. It's a business, but like Moonshine, it's a community-based business. It starts, I believe, like if you start too big, you got a lot of room to fail. Yeah, it's better to grow it small and have a good established foundation before you go out to the whole world.
Indeed. Lessons to be learned. So thank you all for joining Culture and Flavor. And thank you, Dr. Conyers, for joining us.
Thank you, Zella.
We'll talk soon. Bye, y'all. Culture and Flavor is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org.
Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.